Hello. I just finished watching Kayla from Books and Lala, her video reading the top 13 of the GOODREADS Choice Awards horror nominations. And I will link her video down in the description. And I really enjoyed it. And it made me want to do the same for fantasy. Both young adult and adult, because, you know, why be sensible and just pick one when you could do both? So that's what this vlog is, and I don't know if this will ever see the light of day. This is a lot of books, okay? There's a top 10, so this is 20 books. Some of them I have read, but most of them I haven't. So yeah, let's start with young adult. So I have 7 out of the top 10. Okay, so the 3 that I don't have are Children of Virtue and Vengeance, which is a second book in a series, and I don't know what I'm doing about sequels in series that I haven't read yet for the purposes of this challenge, because I'm not going to read the books that are already out to be able to read this, but I also don't think that it's fair to read like the first book in the series and judge it against these others, because that's not the point. So I haven't figured that out yet. But anyway, Children of Virtue and Vengeance. The other one of the other ones is Midnight Sun, which I didn't want to read, and I don't really want to read. I mean, if I'm doing this challenge properly, then I will read it, but I won't be buying it. So there's that one. And then the other one I don't have is Cemetery Boys, and that one is one that I'm really interested in reading. It's paranormal fantasy, ghost fantasy. I love ghost fantasy, love it. So that one, I was kind of waiting for an excuse to buy it anyway, so I'll probably buy that one. And then the ones that I haven't read that I own are Fable by Adrienne Young, and this is on my TBR for the month anyway, so that's helpful. Cinderella is Dead by Kaylin Bayron has been on my TBR, well, was on my October and my November TBR, and I didn't get to it, so it's probably a good thing that I get to it. And Legendborn, which I just got yesterday in my first Illumicrate box, and I'm really interested in this one. So those are pretty good ones to have already in my possession and have to read. And then I don't know how I feel about Midnight Sun and Children of Virtue and Vengeance. I might not read those two. We'll see. Problem is, one of those could win. But to be honest, it's the 5th of December today, and the winners are announced on the 12th, which is next week. So I will know who the winners are before I start reading for this anyway, so I don't know if they rank them. Okay, anyway, moving on to the ones that I own that I have read and that are on the list. Firstly, Starsight by Brandon Sanderson, which is not fantasy. This is very much science fiction. Very much science fiction. I mean, look at the cover. It's science fiction. I don't know what it's doing in this category. Loved it, but it doesn't belong here. Then I'm also confused by this one. This is The Queen of Nothing by Holly Black, and I'm pretty sure this came out in 2019. In fact, I'm almost positive that this came out in 2019. So I did enjoy it, but again, I don't understand what it's doing here. Then, unsurprisingly, Cassandra Clare's latest, well, not the latest book, I think she's had another book come out since this one, but Chain of Gold. I read this, I liked it. Did I love it? No. Did I like it? Yes. And then finally, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins, which I have read. Meh. It was okay. It was fine. But did I love it? No. Did I like it as much as the original Hunger Games trilogy? Definitely not. So, definitely going to read these 3. Jury's out on Midnight Sun and Children of Virtue and Vengeance, or Children of Blood and Bone, and definitely I'm going to pick up Cemetery Boys. So that's young adult, and I need to change my battery. Oh, also I should mention that I didn't vote, I don't think, in the young adult fantasy category of the Goodreads Choice Awards, because of the 4 that I've read, 2 of them I don't think belong there. One of them I didn't really like enough to vote for, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and the other one, Chain of Gold, I didn't think was good enough to win. So I don't think I voted. Let's move on to adult. I own 5 of these books and I have read 3. So we'll start off like last time with the ones that I don't have. So the first is The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. And then we have a sequel again. So this is Peace Talks, which is book 16 in the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. And this one is the main reason why I don't know what to do about sequels, because I definitely will not be reading the first 15 books to read this most recent one. And I don't really want to read the first one and judge it against these other books that came out in 2020, because I feel like that's not really fair. So I might just not read the sequels, I don't know. Then there's A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik, which I am interested in reading, but I have heard that it is quite culturally insensitive, to be nice. So if I manage to read it, I won't be buying it. So I'll find some way to read it other than buying it. And then The Empire of Gold, which is Dave Abad book 3. So same problem again there. Then Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, which I have heard of, but I have absolutely no idea what it's even about. And then that's it. Those are the ones that I don't own. And then for the ones that I do own that I haven't read, we also have the other book that I got yesterday in a Luma crate, so that's kind of weird, which is Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow, and I am very interested in reading this one, so I'm not opposed to that. And another one that I thought came out in 2019, House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas, which is book 1 in the Crescent City series. I'm just going to check the publication page. Oh no, it did come out in 2020. It must have come out right at the beginning of the year. So this one I want to read it anyway. I'm pretty sure my sister has the audiobook, so that would be helpful. Then we have the 3 that I have read, and I'll start with the one that I voted for, because yes, I did vote for one, even though I'd only read 3 out of the top 10, but it's because I think that this book, regardless of what the other books are like, this book deserves to win, and that's The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. This book was fantastic. I loved it. It's so adorable. It's so well written. It's so impactful. And I honestly really hope that this wins, because I think it deserves to. It's really great. Then I also read The Invisible Life of Adi Lahu by Victoria Schwab, or V.E. Schwab. I think that this one will win. I liked it. I don't think it should win, but I liked it. And then we have Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson, which of course I have read and I absolutely loved. And the reason I don't want this one to win is because he doesn't need to win. Brandon Sanderson's career is already amazing, so he doesn't need to win. I don't think he will. I mean, this wasn't even out when the voting rounds started. And although I have finished it, and I know a lot of fans have finished it, I also know a lot of fans who are still reading it. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like if they're going to hold... I have a lot of problems with the Goodreads Choice Awards anyway. I don't think it's about the books. I think it's a popularity contest. I just think that this would be fun to do. So I guess I'm going to do it. But I also think that it's weird that they hold this at the end of the year rather than at the beginning of the following year. Which, if they're going to do that, I feel like they should, if they're going to run it like in November and December, I feel like they should have books from November and December the year before through to October the year of, because they've included Queen of Nothing, which is definitely from 2019. So why is Rhythm of War on the list? Anyway, I don't know. I don't work for Amazon. I don't work for Goodreads. I don't get to make these decisions, but I think I am gonna read these books. This is pretty silly, but I guess I'm giving it a go. It's been a while, I think, since I updated this vlog, because I've been focusing on my reading challenge and my Shardathon vlog, but I'm actually swapping one of my Shardathon reads to one of the books that I am also reading for this vlog. So I figured I'd just check in, and it's one that I've hauled since the last time I updated you. So I'm reading Piranesi today by Susanna Clarke, which is quite a short fantasy, which is quite funny because one of her other books is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which is a very long fantasy book, and this one's quite short, but it sounds really interesting. So I'm just gonna, I have read you the blurb already if you've watched my Shardathon vlog, so sorry for the repetition, but this one, it says, Piranesi lives in the house. Perhaps he always has. In his notebooks, day after day, he makes a clear and careful record of its wonders, the labyrinth of halls, the thousands upon thousands of statues, the tides that thunder up staircases, the clouds that move in slow procession through the upper halls. On Tuesdays and Fridays, Piranesi sees his friend, the other. At other times he brings tributes of food and water lilies to the dead, but mostly he is alone. Messages begin to appear, scratched out in chalk on the pavements. There is someone new in the house, but who are they, and what do they want? Are they a friend, or do they bring destruction and madness, as the other claims? Lost texts must be found, secrets must be uncovered. The world that Piranesi thought he knew is becoming strange and dangerous. The beauty of the house is immeasurable, its kindness infinite. So it just sounds really, really interesting, and I'm feeling in the mood to read this. So as I explained in my Shardathon vlog, when I've got lots to read in a short period of time, it's generally a good idea to go with my mood within that long TBR, and this is kind of just what I feel like reading, so it's what I'm going to read. And I don't think I've had any other books arrive for this particular reading challenge, is that what we're calling it, yet. But I've had this one, of course, and Cemetery Boys is on its way to me. I wasn't able, I don't think I've told you that I wasn't able to get hold of either Midnight Sun or A Deadly Education through my library or through Scribed, and I don't want to buy them, so I'm not going to be reading those two. I have read Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, which I finished actually on Friday morning. I just haven't updated you. I've spoken about this in my Shardathon vlog as well, so at the risk of repetition, I really enjoyed this, but it's very, very strange, and it's definitely not going to be for everyone. This is a story where the story itself is the mystery, so you're trying to figure out what is going on and why everything that's happening is happening as you're reading, and it's very, very short, so I can't really tell you what it's about because it's about what it's about, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. If you need a story with a distinct plot, you're not going to get that from this, you're not going to like it. If you need a story with lots of structure, where it's, you know, a beginning, a middle and an end and a driving force, you're not going to get that with this, you're not going to like it. But if you enjoy just being with a character and figuring things out as they happen, so basically if you're an experienced fantasy reader who's used to being confused as you're reading a book, then you might like this, because that's exactly what this does. I thought that the world building was fantastic. I enjoyed the character and I enjoyed trying to figure out what was going on, and I did figure out for myself what was going on without the author having to tell me, which is good. So yeah, I enjoyed this, but it's definitely a weird one. Reading updates. So I am currently reading House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J Maas, book 1 in the Crescent City series. I'm on chapter 36, page 348, so not quite halfway through yet, but nearly. And this was the winner for adult fantasy, and I am enjoying it so far. Having said that, I don't think, I can already tell you actually for sure that this isn't going to be my favourite out of the top 10, because it's good, but it's not as good as some of the others that I've already read. So anyway, but I am enjoying it. It is the start, as I mentioned, of a new epic fantasy series, and it's kind of urban fantasy-esque. It's set in a completely different kind of world to ours, but it looks a lot and feels a lot like our world. But there are fae and vampires and werewolves and, you know, paranormal beings of various types. And our protagonist really is Bryce, who is half fae, half human. And I suppose the main storyline is a mystery, a murder mystery, but a paranormal murder mystery, which I think I've mentioned before is not my favourite kind of story to read, but I am still enjoying it, and I think that the world that Sarah J Maas has created is interesting, but I think that you can tell that she is not used to writing adult epic fantasy, because the world building is there. I can see that she's thought about it, but it's not necessarily being conveyed in the best way, so I am getting kind of lost in some places about the importance of various things. But anyway, I am enjoying it. It's a long book, but it's an easy read, which is nice. I am listening to the audiobook alongside, and the audiobook is good. Hello! I did indeed finish House of Earth and Blood last night, in fact, and I really enjoyed this, actually. It is quite long, but it's not one of those books that is unnecessarily long, in my opinion, because there's always something happening throughout the story. And I was particularly a fan of the last sort of 150 pages. There was so much going on in that short sort of section at the end, and I thoroughly enjoyed reading that bit in particular. I still don't think that it's, you know, the number one for me. I can already tell that it's not, but I did enjoy it, and I do see why a lot of people loved it. So I can see kind of why it won, but it still wouldn't be my winner. But I did, like I said, I did enjoy it. I'm not kind of knocking it or anything. I think that if you like high fantasy and not too much world building, but an interesting world and mystery type plot lines, then I would recommend this one to you. But I'm doing a kind of power reading weekend with some of the World Hoppers this weekend. I will link the World Hoppers YouTube channel down below, and some of us were discussing the fact that the synopsis for this particular book is too thorough is that what I'm looking for? Basically, there are spoilers in the synopsis, so if you haven't read the synopsis yet, don't. Just go into it without reading the synopsis that's actually on the book. What I would say is, as I mentioned, it's kind of urban fantasy, not really, because it's not actually our world, but it's very similar to our world. But there are things like fae and vampires and werewolves, and it's quite a high fantasy world, but as I mentioned, without too much world building, which was a thing that I didn't necessarily love, but I know a lot of people prefer there not to be too much world building. And then there's the main kind of plot line is a mystery. So I finished Fable by Adrienne Young yesterday. This was my last book of 2020 and actually my 200th book of 2020, so that's fun. This story follows Fable, who is the daughter of a very famous or infamous ship's captain, but right at the beginning of the book we realise that he has abandoned her on an island and said, you know, when you manage to get off this island by yourself, come find me. So we're following her journey with that. It's quite short, it's quite fun, but I will say this ends on a cliffhanger. So if you're not a fan of cliffhangers, I would say possibly put this one off for a short while. The sequel is actually out in March and they're coming out very close together, so I think it's March 16th the sequel for this one comes out, and as I said, it's quite short and I suspect that the sequel will be a similar length. It's called Namesake, so if you are bothered by cliffhangers you could hold off and just read them back to back. I used to really dislike cliffhangers. They don't seem to bother me quite so much anymore, but I still don't love them. But I did enjoy this book. It still won't be my number one pick, I don't think, but I did enjoy it. I did decide to read Legendborn by Tracy Deonn, which I started yesterday. I am on page 154, chapter 18, so I didn't read a huge amount yesterday, but I am enjoying it so far. It's a really interesting story. I like the characters, I like the direction that the story is going in, but it's not, the world building isn't as well explained as I would normally like. I think there is some info dumping, but not a lot, which a lot of people like. So if you're a reader that doesn't like info dumps and likes to just be drip-fed information at relevant and appropriate periods of time in the story, and also be kind of left to figure some things out for yourself, this book will be great for you. I am a weirdo and I actually like info dumps. In fact, I actually prefer info dumps, and this book doesn't have any, so I kind of miss those. There were a few, but I feel like there are certain things that the author is just kind of presuming that you understand. Terms like pages, squires, scions, etc. Which, you know, you can Google them if you're not sure what they are, that's fine. But I feel like the traditional definition of those things isn't actually what the author means, which means that I'm left very slightly confused. But then having said that, it's the start of an epic fantasy series. I'm 154 pages in, as I mentioned, and let me just check how many pages the book has. 490. So it's a nearly 500 page book. That means I'm probably like a third, just over a third of the way in, so the fact that it's not 100% making sense yet isn't necessarily a problem, because that's pretty typical with epic fantasy. But I am still enjoying it, and I'm hoping to read a good chunk of it today, because it definitely is gripping. I definitely want to know what is going to happen and how it's all going to turn out for our protagonist. I finished Legendborn last night or early this morning, depending on how you want to look at it, and I really enjoyed it. I think that it did start to make more sense as I got further and further into the book. It does, again, this is kind of a couple of books in a row now for this challenge, but it does kind of end on a bit of a cliffhanger. So bear that in mind. If that's not your thing, then it happens here. It's not a massive cliffhanger, but it is one. So that's worth knowing about, I think. But I did enjoy it. I really like the character of Bree. She's a really interesting character, and there's a lot of really interesting themes that are explored in here that aren't themes that you typically see in fantasy. So for example, there's a lot of dealing with grief in this one. Right at the beginning of the story, Bree's mother dies, and she's kind of dealing with that grief throughout the story, but also it is very much a YA book, so it's interesting because it takes place, the setting for it is a secret society at a university, but I don't think we have this in the UK. I don't know if this is a real thing, so those of you who live in America can let me know, but she is an early college student, so she's like finishing up high school but by doing university credits. I don't really know, part of that kind of confused me because we don't have that in the UK. You can finish high school early in the UK and go to university, but you're then just a university student at a younger age. It's not really called something different, whereas she's specifically an early college student in here. So the setting is really interesting, but she's still like younger, she's still 16, so it's very much firmly in the young adult category in terms of her experiences and the character development that she's experiencing, because she's kind of finding herself, and I think that that's a theme for a lot of people as they first go to university, but I think it's even more so for somebody who's at university and 16 and dealing with the loss of a parent. So I think that that's a really interesting element of the story that kind of adds that almost kind of contemporary feel to the story, but it is still very much a fantasy in terms of, you know, although it's urban fantasy, there is lots of magic, there are lots of creatures. I won't say too much, but definitely fantasy, but with that kind of contemporary feel, and there's a lot of themes about racism, and racism both in our ordinary world but also in the urban fantasy part of the world that Bree is living in. And it's kind of made me think as well about a lot of the discourse that happens on Instagram, especially in the second half of 2020, is about not just reading fiction by BIPOC authors, but reading fiction about BIPOC joy and not just BIPOC trauma based on racism. And as you know, I tend to read more fantasy than anything else, and that's kind of an understatement. So naturally I gravitate more so towards books by BIPOC authors that fall into the SFF category. And you would think that that would mean that conversations about racism would be less common because it's set in fantasy worlds, but that's, in my experience so far at least, that is not the case. Sorry if you can hear Lee in the background, he's playing a game online with a friend. So in my experience that hasn't actually been the case. It still comes up as a theme in, I want to say, nearly every BIPOC fantasy book that I have read. And I was thinking about that as I was reading this, and it kind of made me feel a little bit sad that racism is so much a part of BIPOC lives, including, of course, BIPOC authors' lives, because the fact that they're an author doesn't mean that it's any different for them. So it's so much a part of their lives that even when they are writing about a BIPOC character who is falling in love or learning magic, or, you know, part of an adventure, is a chosen one, you know, whatever kind of story it is that you're dealing with that should be and potentially is about BIPOC joy, you still have these undertones of this particular character, and I do include Brie in this, dealing with racism both historically and in the here and now. And I'm using this book as an example, but as I say, this is not an isolated example. Lots of books that I've read by BIPOC authors have this same thing. It comes up time and time again, and it's because it's so much a part of these authors' lives that even in a fantasy world, it comes through, and that's really sad to me. So I don't really have a point that I'm trying to make here, but it was just an observation that I made that I wanted to share with you. So I did. So that is Legendborn. As I said, did enjoy it, and I'm now going to move on to Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas. This lighting is weird for a vlog, but it's night time and this is what we're working with, so apologies. I haven't updated you in quite a while on this reading challenge, and that's because I kind of started a new job this week. I've been promoted at work basically, and my promotion started on Monday, and it's just been a bit of a whirlwind of kind of trying to get used to things. So anyway, you're not here for that, you're here for the books. I finished Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas. This is a story about Yadriel, who is a trans man, or boy I suppose. I mean, I think he's 17, so basically a man. And he is part of the Brewhex community, which are people who can see ghosts and help to move them on to wherever it is they go next. And the Brewhex are split into kind of two groups. So you've got Brewhos and Brewyas. And the Brewyas are the women and the Brewhos are the men, and the Brewyas are kind of like magical and they can heal people, and the Brewhos are the ones who are in charge of, you know, ferrying the dead to the beyond. And Yadriel is trans, so he is a Brewho, but his family and his community don't recognise that. So this is kind of a story of him trying to prove to his family, and I guess to himself as well, that he is a man and therefore a Brewho. And as part of this, he summons a spirit, but he summons the wrong spirit, and it kind of follows the relationship that develops between Yadriel and this spirit. And I liked it. This is a young adult novel, and I think that it possibly reads slightly towards the younger end of young adult, so that's probably worth knowing, because I know some people prefer books that are at the higher end of young adult. It's quite a sweet story. It is a little insta-lovey, in my opinion. Not like really badly, but a little bit, I think. And I really liked the kind of commentary in this one. I think that's kind of the main draw of this book, because it is Own Voices Latinx trans rep, and I think there's a really interesting conversation around gender in languages that are gendered. So, you know, French, Spanish, any of the Latin languages really are gendered, and so there's a really interesting conversation around how people identify when that is the case. I think that, as I mentioned, part of this is Yadriel proving to himself that he's a man and proving to others that he's a man, and I don't know, that didn't sit happily with me, because it is addressed in the book, but he shouldn't have to do that. And you know, that is the reality. People are not accepting of gender identities other than the outward perception that appears obvious to the eye, and so people who do identify as trans or NB, or, you know, anywhere really on the LGBTQIA plus spectrum that isn't cis-het, feel like they have to prove who they are, and that's really kind of sad to me. So even though this story has an overall hopeful and joyful message, it still made me sad in a lot of ways that this is so much people's experience that a book has come out of it. I'm not saying that the book shouldn't exist or anything like that. I just think it's just an observation. I'm just sad that that is the experience of so many people, and that people feel like they have to do a certain thing to prove to others who they are. So anyway, I liked the book. I liked the book. I guess that's it. So that's that one, and I'm now also in the process of listening to The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. I don't know what's going on with this book at the moment, but I can't find it anywhere. You cannot buy this book right now. I guess it's like sold out everywhere or something. I don't know, but I've tried Waterstones, I've tried Foils, I've tried Wordery and Hive and bookshop.org, and I even checked on Amazon, and even Amazon doesn't have it. So I don't know, maybe it'll come back in stock soon. Anyway, managed to get a audiobook through my library, and so I'm listening to it, and I'm not enormously far in, to be honest. I am probably about 22%, so I've listened to 3.5 hours, and I have 12 hours and 40 minutes still to go, and honestly, I'm confused. I think that this is, I've read one other book by N.K. Jemisin, which was The Fifth Season, and I was confused by that one too. And I think that N.K. Jemisin's writing just doesn't really work for me. It's very beautiful, but I think that's my problem, because it's not purple prose. But I mean, okay, bear with me with this, because I feel like this is difficult for me to kind of put into words what I mean here, but I have read books like The Starless Sea and Piranesi, The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern and Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, which are purple-ish in their prose, and they're kind of descriptive and beautifully written, okay? But the thing about those books is they are about the writing, okay? There's stuff going on, but not a lot of stuff going on. There's not much plot, there's not much character. It's really all about the world building. Okay, so that's one thing, and I've read those 2 books and I feel like I shouldn't like them, but actually I do, which baffles my mind because it's just not the kind of thing I would expect myself to like. Okay, now with Jemison, her writing is also very beautiful, but she's also doing plot, and it's very intricate plot. She's also doing characters, and they're usually, I mean, in my experience so far, really well built and fleshed out characters. And she's also doing the world building and creating these really, really interesting worlds. And you've got the beautiful writing. So you would think, well, that's amazing. It's everything that you want. But apparently, it's just too much for me, and I just kind of get lost in it all and end up just disengaging because it's just kind of, it's too much. And I've talked about this before. I only just learned that there was a name for this and that it was actually a thing recently, but I have aphantasia, which means that I cannot visualise in my mind what I am reading. It just doesn't happen for me. I'm just reading a book, I'm not visualising it, and I think possibly that has something to do with why I'm struggling so much with N.K. Jemison's books. So because of that, I find them daunting, and even though I'm interested in what is happening, I don't get kind of that feeling of I can't wait to pick this book back up again and find out what happens next, because I know that when I start reading it, I'll kind of understand what's happening, but I'll mostly just be overwhelmed by the book. And that's not an enjoyable experience for me. And I don't want to DNF it because it's not a bad book. It's very much just, this is too much for me. So I'm going to carry on reading it, but I might have another book on the go at the same time and see if that helps at all, because I feel like it's just maybe too much to have just that book on the go. I don't really know. Really hope that all of this has made sense, because I feel so awful, because it's like her writing is just so good, but I just can't appreciate it because it's just too much. Too much writing, too much plot, too much character, too much world, too much intricacy, and I don't understand what's happening, and it's just like overwhelming me to the point that I can't enjoy it anymore. So I feel bad saying that, and I also feel like, you know, I'm not a real fantasy reader if I can't enjoy Jemison, but that's just the reality of where I am. So I'm not DNFing it. I'm not necessarily ruling out DNFing it at this point, because one of my goals this year is to engage with and enjoy what I'm reading, and so far I'm not really doing that with this book. So it is the next day, it's Saturday, and I read a little bit more of The City We Became last night, and I have decided to DNF it. So as I mentioned in the last clip, I really this year want to focus on engaging and enjoying what I'm reading, and I just wasn't able to engage with The City We Became. I think it, as I mentioned before, it was just kind of too much for me, and I would rather read something that I'm really going to enjoy. I have a really hard time DNFing. I feel so guilty, especially when it's such a popular and highly respected book like this one is, but I did end up looking up a full plot summary, like a full spoilery plot summary, and the things that were bothering me were not going to change. And I don't want to get too into what exactly I mean by that, because it would be spoilery, but yeah, I've decided to DNF it. So I'm going to be moving on to Cinderella is Dead today. Right, as you can probably tell from the lighting, it is many hours later now. I did do some uni work, I did some filming, And I've done a little bit of reading, not that much. I have decided to read Cinderella is Dead by Kaylin Bayron. This is the last YA book on this list, and I'm on page 62, chapter 7. Very quick and easy read, actually. I ended up getting through those first sort of 60 pages relatively quickly for me. I think this book is the world that the fairy tale of Cinderella took place in 200 years after the story of Cinderella took place, and the story has taken on kind of a life of its own. So it's like mandatory reading for everyone. Girls have to be able to recite it by heart, like the whole thing. They have to speak it out loud every single day, and every year there's a ball, and girls, when they reach the age of 16, they have to go to this ball and they have to get chosen by a man, and if they don't get chosen after 3 attempts at attending the ball, i.e. by the time they're 18 years old, then their lives are forfeit and they get sold into like slave labour essentially. And our protagonist, Sophia, is a lesbian, and she doesn't want to go to the ball, but she doesn't have a choice, and she doesn't want to marry a man, but she has no choice. And there's also quite a lot of, I mean, as I say, I'm only 60 pages in so far, there's already quite a lot of discussion about, you know, domestic abuse, so trigger warning for that. I like the writing style so far. It's nice and easy. I mean, it's a YA book, but it's kind of written in like a contemporary style, so I tend to find that contemporary YA is the easiest kind of genre within YA to read in terms of like the speed with which you can read it, or at least for me. And this one is written in that kind of style, even though it's got fantasy elements, I think will be kind of coming. I mean, it's a fantasy land, so I'm presuming there'll be some kind of fantasy element coming. Maybe not. Maybe that would be cool, actually, to be in like a fantasy world but have it be a contemporary. I don't know. I will report back on whether or not there's any kind of like magic. But so far, I like the writing style. Nice and easy, kind of what I needed, actually. Coming out of DNFing The City We Became, I feel like I needed something easy to read, and this is that, so that is good. I am reading it physically. I think I will probably download the audiobook for the Once and Future Witches, but for this one I'm just going to read it physically because it's nice, easy, hopefully relatively quick read. Okay, it's the next day and I have now finished reading Cinderella is Dead by Kaylin Bayron, and I really enjoyed it. It was really good fun, quite a nice, easy read. There were some sections that were a little frustrating because things that were happening seemed to really obviously point towards one answer, but it wasn't obvious to the characters, and that can always be a little bit annoying. But there were still some twists that I wasn't necessarily surprised by, but I hadn't kind of thought about it and anticipated it. So I did enjoy this one. I think everything that I said yesterday still stands for it. I think that if you want a lighter fantasy with a bit of a contemporary feel for YA, then this is a really good one. There is magic in here to answer that question. And that was the last of the young adult fantasy books that I had to read that I hadn't already read. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap that section of this up by starting with the Goodreads Choice Awards ranking for these books. So in at number 10 we had Legendborn by Tracy Dion. I suspect that part of the reason why this is so low down in the rankings is because it had only just come out when the Goodreads Choice Awards kind of went up, but this was in at number 10. Then Cinderella Was Dead was in at number 9. Fable by Adrienne Young at number 8. Starsight by Brandon Sanderson at number 7. And apparently this is the young adult fantasy and science fiction category. I don't really know why there's a joint category and it's not separated, but there's one sci-fi on the list and this is it, number 7. Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas at number 6. Then at number 5 was Children of Virtue and Vengeance, which I didn't read because I haven't read the first book, and followed by that at number 4 was Midnight Sun by Stephanie Meyer, which I did not read because I couldn't get a copy from my library, and I did not want to purchase a copy because I do not support this author or these books. Then at number 3 we had Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare. Number 2 was The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. And then number 1, best young adult fantasy book in the Goodreads Choice Awards was The Queen of Nothing by Holly Black, which did not come out in 2020, nor did Starsight by Brandon Sanderson, in fact, so bit of a weird one. So this is heavy. This is the ranking according to Goodreads and the voting via Goodreads. So now I have to figure out what my ranking is, and this is a top 8, I guess, for me, or whatever, because there were 2 that I didn't read, but down at the bottom for me is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. I think you knew this was coming. This was one of my most disappointing reads of 2020, so naturally this would come at the bottom. Following that up, I would go with The Queen of Nothing by Holly Black. I did like this one, but I don't think it's better than any of the others here, so this would be my number 7, I guess. Then my number 6 would be Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare. Again, nothing wrong with this book. I did enjoy it, but I definitely don't think it's better than the others that are here. Then number 5 for me would be Cinderella is Dead by Kaylin Bayron. Then at number 4 I'm going to put Fable by Adrienne Young, another really fun one. At number 3 I'm going to put Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas. At number 2 I'm going to put Starsight by Brandon Sanderson, and at number 1 I am going to put Legendborn by Tracy Dion, which I did really enjoy. This would be my ranking for these books, for the YA books. So quite different to the Goodreads results, because actually my bottom 3 were the top 3 of the Goodreads Choice Awards results, and then my very top one was the 10th. But as I say, I think it probably would have done better if it had been out a little bit earlier in the year. So that is my ranking for the YA reads. So now I just have one more adult book to read, The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow. This is the dust jacket, and I'm going to start this today. I don't have my copy of the book, the Once and Future Witches, on me right now, because I just finished filming, which you can probably tell from this setup, but I'm around just under halfway through the book right now, and I'm actually really enjoying it, which the reason I sound surprised is because there's a lot about it that I wouldn't normally like. So it's very historical. It's set in the late 1890s during the suffragist movement in New Salem, when they're just kind of getting over the witch trials, and now there's this potential resurgence of witches, and our protagonists are witches, so we're kind of, there's that going on, and then there's like a mystery going on a little bit as well. And historical fiction is always a bit hit or miss for me. Even historical fantasy can be a bit hit or miss for me. I tend to do better when there's like a dual timeline going on, but there isn't for this one. It's all completely set in the 1890s. And also it's got not quite a literary style, but more on the literary side than the traditional fantasy side of a writing style. So there's a lot about it that normally I probably wouldn't gel with, but I'm actually really enjoying it so far. It's really quite gripping, even though there's not that much going on in the grander scheme of things, but you do have multiple perspectives. So you've got the perspectives of the three sisters that the story is about. So you've kind of got more content naturally there for that reason. And I do like all of the sisters. They're all very different from each other, but they're all interesting to read from. I'm really interested to see where it's going to go, because there are lots of threads, and it's actually a standalone, so all of those threads hopefully will be resolved within this one book, which is exciting because there aren't a lot of standalone adult fantasy stories, so I'm looking forward to that as well. But I will probably just wait now to check in with you again once I've actually finished it. It is a giant cup of tea kind of morning. Okay, so I finished reading The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow last night, and I really liked this, but I have some kind of confusing feelings about it. So I think I've already explained what this is about, so I'm not going to do that again. What I will say is there's quite a lot of diversity in this book. So we have lesbian characters, we have disabled characters, we have pregnant characters, we have black characters, we have trans characters, etc. And I thought that a lot of that was done very naturally. It wasn't like one of those tick box exercises where there was diversity being included for the sake of diversity, okay? With the exception of the trans character, which I felt was slightly shoehorned in just for the sake of it. But aside from that, all of the other characters seemed very natural and well placed, and I enjoyed that. It's also a largely female cast, which makes sense given the subject area, because it's not just about kind of witches and the persecution of witches, but there's always, with that discussion in the real world, there's the undertone of actually witches are just women, and it's just a way to persecute women who are seeking equality. So there's that discussion going on as well, which is why it makes sense that it was a largely female cast. So there are some male characters, but largely female cast, and pretty good on the diversity. Where I get kind of confused about how I feel about that is that the author of this book, as far as I know, as far as I've seen so far, and I need to do more research on this, but as far as I've seen so far, she is a white, cis, straight woman. And I kind of hope that she had some sensitivity readers for this book, because I felt like some of the representation was really good, but I don't know, because I am a white woman. I don't know what it feels like to be black in America, especially in the 1890s. So I can't speak to that representation, and although I have Crohn's disease, which I don't consider a disability but can be considered a disability, I just don't, because mine is quite mild. I don't have the kind of disability that was represented in this book, so I can't speak to that representation. I'm not a lesbian, so I can't speak to that representation. The gender equality thing I can kind of relate to in a certain way, but overall I can't really speak to whether or not any of that representation was done well. But if it was, and if it was all sensitivity read and it's spot on in terms of the rep, at least in the most for the most part, because nobody's experience is the same as the next person, then I think this is a really great book. It's really well written, it's got lots of atmosphere. What I would say is, because it follows three sisters, it really reminded me in some ways of Charmed, which is a show that I just absolutely loved when I was a teenager and I watched just like constantly. I haven't watched it for many years, but I have seen every single episode at least a couple of times. And because they're these three sisters and they're witches and they've got very different kind of personalities and traits and things, they've just really reminded me of the three sisters in Charmed. And in case you're interested, Piper was always my favourite in Charmed, and in this I think Agnes is my favourite, just in case you've read it and were wondering. I do recommend this book if you haven't read it. I think it's definitely worth picking up. It is standalone. It's kind of urban, historical, paranormal fantasy type book, which was nice. And as I said, it was really well written, really well paced. I thought that a lot goes into it. It's 500 pages and it doesn't feel fast paced. It kind of in some ways actually feels slow paced, but there is always something happening and the plot is always moving forward, but it is a character driven story. So I do definitely recommend this one. I'm glad I read it, but I do have slightly confusing feeling. I mean, I only just finished it last night, so I potentially need to sit with it for a bit longer, and maybe I'll have more to say about it in my end of the month wrap up for January. But that was the last of the adult fantasy reads for this video, so we can now run through the top 10 of the Goodreads ranking and then my own ranking. Now, I didn't read the whole of the top 10. I read in the end 6 of the top 10, and you'll see why in a minute. So number 10 was Peace Talks by Jim Butcher, which is book 16 in the Dresden Files. So I wasn't going to read 15 books to be able to read that one, and it didn't make sense to read number 1 because it's not the same thing at all. And then number 9 was The Empire of Gold, which is book 3 in the Daevabad trilogy, and I haven't read the first 2 yet, and we're actually reading those for book club in January and March, January and February, and then we'll be reading The Empire of Gold in March. So I didn't read that one. Then at number 8 there was A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik, which I also didn't read because I have heard that Naomi Novik had sensitivity readers and then she changed the book after the sensitivity readers had done their read and before it was published. So there's actually now content in there that is offensive and upsetting to black people, and she's issued an apology, but it's too late. The book is out there. She had the sensitivity readers and she didn't kind of make good use of them. So I didn't want to buy this book, and I wasn't opposed to reading it, but I didn't want to buy it. And then I couldn't find it either. Well, it's at my library, but it's got like a 6 months waiting list, which doesn't fit for this video, and Scribd doesn't have it, so I didn't read that one. Then in at number 7, one I did read was Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. Then at number 5 was The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow. Then at number 4 was The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin, which, as you know, I DNF'd. I still feel kind of bad about it, but it just didn't work for me, so that was at number 4. And number 3 was Rhythm of War, which of course I have read. Wait, no. That was number 4. I can't count. So this was number 4. The City We Became was 5. The Once and Future Witches was 6. Piranesi was 7. Wow. Then at number 3 was The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune, which I have read and was actually the one that I voted for in the Goodreads Choice Awards. Then at number 2 was The Invisible Life of Adil Lahou by V.E. Schwab, which I have read. And finally, at number 1 was the House of Earth and Blood, book 1 in the Crescent City series by Sarah J. Maas, which I have also read. So in terms of, this is really heavy, this stack. In terms of the ones that I have read, this is all of those, and don't forget that The City We Became would go in the middle because that one I DNF'd and I didn't have a copy of anyway, and then there's a few at the bottom that I also do not have. So that was the Goodreads ranking. Now I'm going to do my ranking. Okay, now just quickly, I don't remember if I mentioned this at the beginning, but I voted for The House in the Cerulean Sea for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I hadn't read Rhythm of War yet at the time that I was voting, because I think that at the time I was voting it wasn't even out yet. So there's a whole conversation to be had about that, which I'm not going to have because I'm pretty sure I've mentioned it before, but whatever. So that was part of why I voted for this, even though I was pretty sure that Rhythm of War would end up being my favourite. But also because Brandon Sanderson doesn't need that accolade. He's already hugely successful, so I would rather a lesser known author get that accolade, which again, Sarah J. Maas doesn't really need the accolade either. But anyway, but now I have to rank these, and it's actually really hard because I enjoyed all of them. This is actually really tough. I really liked all of these books, so I think it's just a case of me putting them in degree of how much I liked them. So I'm going to think on that for a minute and I'll be right back. I mean, I'm not going to look like I've moved, but I'm literally just going to press pause on the recording for a minute while I think about this, and then I'll be back. Okay, I think I figured it out. This is really tough. As I mentioned, this is just a rank. I liked all of these, so this is just literally ranking them in the order that I liked them, I guess. And the last two are kind of interchangeable, I would say. But anyway, so how many of these are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6. So I'm not including The City We Became in any of this because I didn't finish it, so that's not included. So in at number 6 for me, I would have The Invisible Life of Adi LaRue. I really liked this one. I enjoyed the character of Adi. It is standalone. I would have liked to see more of Luke and Adi's relationship with Luke in this than we did, but overall I think it was a really well put together and well written story, so I did enjoy this one. I enjoyed all of them, so there's no point me saying that. Then at number 5 I would put Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This one is such an interesting and different kind of book. I think I would say that it's kind of similar to The Starless Sea in terms of style, but it's still very different from anything that I've ever read, even including The Starless Sea. And I really enjoyed it for that. It's very short, but there's just so much packed into these pages, and there's a little bit of mystery, there's a lot of character, and I just found something about this really fascinating. Just the way it's written, and the story is just so different and interesting to me. So this one is in at number 5. Then I had a hard time with 3 and 4 and the way round that I wanted to put them, but I think at number 4 I'm going to say The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow. Again, this was just really well written and enjoyable, and it had so many interesting themes that I really enjoyed reading about. Then at number 3 I did put The House of, is it The House? No, just House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. This, I mean, it's not badly written, it's not as beautifully written as the others that I've mentioned, but it is well written still. It's just a bit more of a straightforward writing style, but I personally don't mind that and kind of enjoy that. It it's just really fun and enjoyable and kind of just frivolous in a way. It's not as deep or impactful as the other three that I've mentioned, but I still had a fun time reading it, and I probably had more fun reading this than the other three that I've already spoken about, so that's why this one is here. And then again with the final two, these could go the other way round, and if I were actually voting, like if I was ranking them for the Goodreads Choice Awards, then I would put them the other way around, and I would probably put the 3 and 4 the other way around as well, because again, accolades aren't necessarily needed by Sarah J Maas. But in at number 2 I would have The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. If you've seen my top 10 books of 2020, this isn't a surprise, this order of ranking, because it basically matches what I said in that video. But this I just love. It's so just heartwarming and feel good, and this one is really well written as well, and yeah, it was just chef's kiss. Loved it. And then of course at number 1 I have to put Rhythm of War, purely because this was my favourite out of these, and you know, that no one's surprised by that. I love Brandon Sanderson. I love the Stormlight Archive. This is just epic, and so much happens in this book, and it's just so good. Again, pretty simply written. Brandon Sanderson is known for not being a beautiful writer, but I just love his worlds and his books, and so I have to put this one at number 1. It would be disingenuous for me not to. But again, this is about degrees of enjoyment, because I enjoyed every single one of this 6. So there we go. Ooh. That is my personal ranking, which I think is quite different to the Goodreads ranking. So this challenge was a bit of a mission, to be honest, but I am glad that I did it, and I hope that you have enjoyed this. I suspect that this is a really long video, so if you're still with me, thank you, and leave me a tea emoji in the comments so I know that you were here, and let me know what your rankings would be. I'm not expecting you to go off and read all of these before you do that, just of the ones that you've read, what order would you put them in for both YA and for adults? And that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button, and I hope to see you here again soon. Thanks, bye.